Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest comics for the week of August 12th. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out a bi-weekly article that switches between hottest comics and trending comics. Hottest comics is the 5 hottest moving comic books based on volume of sales and movement in the market. So think of this as the 5 most liquid books of the week. But before I get into the video, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps with the channel, do one of those things I'd appreciate. But let us get into this article here today. And of course, this article is always written by Matt Tuck. I will put a link in the description if you guys want to do your own reading, but I will break it down for you. And coming in at the number 5 spot, we got a book that everybody, I'm sure, has in their collection at some point, a book that I think everyone should have in their collection. But this one right here is Avengers Annual number 10, up 25 spots, now sitting in the 24th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this would be the book that came out in 1981, written by Chris Claremont, and would feature the first appearance of the character known as Rogue. Now, I'm sure you guys all know Rogue. Rogue is one of the X-Men's most popular characters, I think coming off of the animated X-Men series in the early 90s. A lot of people fell in love with that character. A lot of people really gravitated towards her. And ever since then, she's been definitely one of the most popular female superheroes I think there is in all of Marvel comic books. Now, we got a version of Rogue in the Fox X-Men franchise, who of course was played by Anna Paquin. I think they definitely did a different take on the character, at least in comparison to that of the character we know from the animated series. And I think a lot of comic book collectors are really heavily anticipating Rogue showing up in the MCU. Now, as far as why this book is moving this week, well, of course, we're still kind of coming off of the heels of San Diego Comic-Con. There have been a lot of announcements. A lot of properties are being anticipated in the next couple years or so. A lot of people are thinking that the X-Men might be showing up. Certainly, we all feel like Rogue is going to be playing a part in the X-Men 97 animated series on Disney+. I think that's got people thinking about this book a lot. But I also think one of the other factors is, we have the Marvels coming in next year. And even though it doesn't seem like we're going to be getting Rogue, it does feel like the MCU is kind of laying the foundation for a possible storyline of Carol Danvers and Rogue meeting at some point. Of course, if you guys know Rogue's origin, you would know that Rogue actually got her powers, at least the ability to fly and be really strong, from actually touching Carol Danvers. So it feels like, at some point in the MCU, that would definitely be a good storyline to explore. And it's my personal opinion that I actually think that that could be a really good catalyst in setting off Avengers versus X-Men at some point in the future. This is definitely a great book in my opinion. I think one that collectors all want to own, and it makes a lot of sense why it's one of the hottest comic books this week. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look here at some of the 9.8s. There actually is one 9.9 in the census, but don't really need to talk about that today. 9.8s have 810 on the census. Fair market value suggests 1,000. 30-day moving is 981. So again, because it's a Copper Age book, or I guess maybe a late Bronze Age book, kind of has a similar graph to a lot of the books we've seen in this current market, where it had spikes in 2021. Currently where it sits, feels like it's kind of establishing its new floor in the market. But, due to the activity with, the animated series, I think that this is definitely going to be a book that has a lot of eyes on it at some point in the near future, but definitely seems to be kind of hovering around that 4-figure range at the 9.8 level. And then of course down here at the bottom, 1981 book, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade too often, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can see them being sold around that $75 to $100 range or so. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest comic of the week. And the 4th hottest comic of the week is a very cool one that I actually didn't have in my collection for quite some time until recently. This one is actually Infinity Gauntlet number 1, up 27 spots, now sitting in the 36th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this would be the book written by Jim Starlin in 1991 that would feature the first issue, the first title series of the crossover event known as the Infinity Gauntlet. Now, I'm sure you guys all know that basically Avengers Infinity War and Endgame was sort of at least based in some part off of this series right here with Jim Starlin. I mean, it was an amalgamation of a lot of different storylines in comic books, but for the most part, I think Infinity Gauntlet number 1 sort of represents, the storyline that we saw in the MCU, or the culmination of the Infinity Saga in the MCU. And at that time, this book was definitely extremely hot in the market. A lot of collectors were looking at this thing. I think some of the peak values were being set at the time of Infinity War and Endgame. And like a lot of things do, once you're past the film or past the TV show, a lot of things correct in the market. And this book definitely had a correction. But of course, unfortunately, due to the recent events of George Perez, who of course is one of the artists on this book, he recently passed away. And I think, out of respect to his amazing artwork, a lot of people, went to those George Perez books. So a lot of people were picking up that Infinity Gauntlet number 1. We're also coming off of San Diego Comic-Con. We all know that, this current saga is building towards the multiverse, and people are thinking about Secret Wars and stuff. So as Matt points out in the article, there could just be sort of a nostalgia factor thinking about, the crossover events and how people just want to get their hands on them because they really enjoyed the Infinity Saga. So it kind of makes sense that this book would have a resurgence, especially since it hit its new floor. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s actually have 2,104 on the census. Fair market value suggested to be at 230. 30-day moving is at 250. So definitely a book that has had prior peak values. I mean, you can see this one definitely had a spike in 2018 when we had Infinity War. This also had a spike in 2015 or so, which I think would have been right around the time when we got the original San Diego Comic-Con announcing Avengers Infinity War as being an event film. So I think a lot of people were buying it for that. This book, of course, shot up due to 2021, and now kind of where it's sitting is matching right in line to sort of the height of the book, where it was selling for at during the course of Infinity War. You can see the last couple sales here, 230, 280, 230, 240. So definitely like a very affordable book if this is something you are a fan of. And then of course, 1991, not going to see it slabbed too often at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can find them being sold around that $25 to $40 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest comic of the week. And the third hottest comic of the week is one that, it is what it is. I feel like I never really get excited to talk about this one because we've talked about it so many times, but I do need to at least mention it. This one right here is X-Men Volume 2, Number 1, the Collector's Edition, up 32 spots, now sitting in the 44th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, you guys know this is the book by Jim Lee and Chris Claremont that would feature the Collector's Edition cover. I think this would be known as cover E, that would feature kind of the fold out where you can see all the various covers. I mean, this is such a landmark book for a lot of collectors. Everybody just loves to own these things. And this right here was sort of the kind of the first real, I think, multiple variant covers that existed in comic books that sort of set a new trend in the comic book market. There are so many copies out there. I mean, it's the most highest selling comic book of all time that it's always going to have a large volume of sales in the market, whether the prices are high or the prices are low. And I think a lot of people just love to have this thing in the 9.8 slab. I'm not going to belabor the point here. Let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.9s, there's actually 24 on the census. Hasn't been a sale since 2021, which you can see sold for $578. 9.8s, there's a lot of them, 2,483. Fair market value is $95. 30-day moving, kind of right in line to that at that $100 range. And when you go into eBay looking for the raw copies, I mean, you can actually find copies of this thing being sold around that $5 to $10 to $15 range. I mean, depending on the deal you can find for yourself, depending on the grade. But because we've talked about this book so often, let's talk about a little bonus book right here, one that almost made the hot list. This was actually pointed out by Matt in one of his other articles, but this one right here is Sandman number 1. Of course, we recently have the debut of the Sandman series on Netflix, and this book has been moving a lot in the market. And although it has not hit the hottest 5 comic books in this week, it is definitely really close. I mean, it's probably the 6th hottest comic of the week. So maybe it's kind of cool to talk about this one as well. But of course, this is a book written by Neil Gaiman that came out in 1989. And like I mentioned, due to the excitement of the Netflix series, this book has been really moving a lot in the market. Let me know in the comments, have you guys actually seen the Sandman show yet? What are your feelings on it? I know that there were some concerns with fans about, the show taking a new direction, but it definitely seems like a lot of people are really enjoying this one. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s actually have 1,042 on the census. Fair market value is $850. 30-day moving kind of right in line at $850 as well. This is another book, like many things, that, kind of set its record high in 2021 and is sort of finding its new floor, but definitely a book that is kind of flirting with that $1,000 price point. I mean, you can see last couple sales were $900, $950, $900, $900, $870, $899, $930, $920. So definitely at that $900 level. It once was pushing that 4-figure plateau, but not quite there yet. But it definitely seems like, if the show is successful and continues to be successful, it can build off of its, success over the next few seasons or so, kind of like how The Boys has. And then down here at the bottom, 89 book, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, they're definitely expensive. I mean, the lowest one I could find for myself was around the $250 level, but you're looking to spend around $300 or $350 in this current market. All right, now that I got the honorable mention book out of the way, let's jump back into the list and talk about the second hottest comic of the week. And the second hottest comic of the week is a very cool book, a personal favorite of mine. This one right here is Uncanny X-Men number 221, up 50 spots, now sitting in the 43rd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, you guys know this is the first appearance of the character known as Mr. Sinister, a book written by Chris Claremont that came out in 1987. Now, of course, Mr. Sinister, in my opinion, is one of the X-Men's top villains. I mean, I don't know if I would put him in the top 3, but I would certainly put him in the top 5. And one of the things I think is really exciting about this book is that, we never actually saw Mr. Sinister in the Fox franchise. I mean, they did allude to him in a post-credit scene talking about the SX Corporation, but we never actually got that payoff. And it does feel like if the MCU wants to do different things with the X-Men and pursue different storylines, Mr. Sinister definitely seems like a character that could be a good fit for that. One of the other reasons that this book could be moving a lot in the market is, like I mentioned with the Rogue book, we all know that people are anticipating the X-Men 97 series. Of course, Mr. Sinister had a big role in the X-Men animated show back in the day, and it does seem like he could play a factor in the return of the X-Men animated series. They could certainly explore some storylines with Mr. Sinister. I also personally just like Mr. Sinister as far as a Spec character is concerned. I mean, he has a lot of ties to the High Evolutionary. We know that High Evolutionary is going to be showing up in Guardians of the Galaxy. And then also knowing that we're moving to Secret Wars from the announcements at San Diego Comic-Con, if we're thinking about the Jonathan Hickman storyline and the Secret Wars and how that one unfolded, Mr. Sinister actually played a very important role to, be sort of the liaison of Doctor Doom in that storyline. So it does kind of beg the question. I mean, maybe they might bring Mr. Sinister into the MCU, and then when we get the Secret Wars Avengers film, they could utilize him playing that role he did in the Hickman storyline. But due to all the speculation and all these touch points, that definitely gave this book right here a boost in the market and is definitely the second hottest comic of the week. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. There's actually two 9.9s on the census. One sale happened back in 2019 for $5,401. That's definitely a really high sale, especially for a book that came out in 1987. So would be really interesting to see if this could be a five-figure book in this current marketplace. 9.8s have 1,665 on the census. Fair market value is $375. 30-day moving is $446. So definitely a book that is selling higher than that of its fair market value. So it's had a big spike up in the market. You can see that actually this is a book that shot up like all books in 2021, had a correction, and then kind of fell off a little bit, but kind of is establishing its sort of new floor point back at that $400 level. I mean, I think it dipped below the $300 for a time. There's a $288 sale right here that someone got a steal on, but definitely a book that is selling, pretty healthily around the $4 bill mark. So it'll be interesting to see what this book could do if we actually got Mr. Sinister in the MCU. And then of course, down here at the bottom, 87 book, not going to see it slabbed too often at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically you can see them being sold around that $40 to $75 range or so. All right, well, let's move on now to the hottest comic of the week. And the hottest comic of the week is one that is probably no surprise to anyone who is out there following this show on Amazon. But this one right here is Paper Girls #1, up 71 spots, now sitting in the #7 slot, the 7th most bought and sold book in the market. But of course, Paper Girls #1, a book written by Brian K. Vaughan that came out in 2015. Now, like I already mentioned, they had the recent debut of the Paper Girls TV show. This has been a comic book that has been, often compared to that of Stranger Things, or I guess this came out before Stranger Things. So Stranger Things is often kind of maybe compared to Paper Girls or however you want to talk about it. But that has a lot of comic book collectors thinking that this could be a really big show for the future. I mean, imagine if, Paper Girls on Amazon reaches even, a third of or half of the success of Stranger Things. It would definitely be one of the biggest shows out there in the market. And if this is, something that is actually very successful and has multiple seasons and kind of, becomes more and more popular over time, this is definitely going to be a book that trends up over the years. So a lot of people are thinking that this could be a really good buy, a really good entry point into this book. Also, it's moving a lot in the market. People could be selling their copies, trying to cash in on, the hype of the show and the FOMO of the show. So, it's definitely one of those books that has been having a lot of eyeballs on it and a lot of movement. Let me know what you guys think. Have you guys watched the Paper Girl show? Have you guys been enjoying it? But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look here at some of the values. 9.8s have 2,296 on the census. Fair market value is $110. 30-day moving, 107. So kind of right in line to fair market value. And of course, 9.8 book, $100, never really a bad entry point if you ask me, especially if it's, the first appearance or the title issue of a comic book that actually has a show out there, in the market. But you can see this book definitely had a huge spike up, more towards that $200 level in 2021. Now it's kind of selling down in line to the $100 level. It had previous peaks due to the announcements of the show coming. But, it definitely seems like a okay entry point. And if this is a show that ends up going on for many, many, many years, I definitely think that this could be a book that goes up in value in the future. I mean, if we think about, other successful indie shows like The Boys, you can see how, year over year or season over season, the book trends slowly upward. So that could be the same thing that happens to Paper Girls right there. And then, of course, if we're talking about raw copies of this thing, when I go into eBay looking for them, I can see them being sold around that $20 or $25 level. Anyways, that's all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest comics of the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I'll see you in the next video.